All right, we are back after the break with Eric Engelmann here. And Sohrab made it on the last minute, dealing with the technical difficulties. So we are both together here. Introduce Eric. Sohrab, you want to start?
Yes. So first of all, it's great to have you with us, Eric. It's the first time that 3 members of the Scrum Alliance Board of Directors are on this stage here at the Agile 100. Eric, it's a pleasure to host you. And Susie and I got to know Eric due to our work at the Scrum Alliance Board. He is the current chairman. We've spent tons of days working together, tons of dinners together, a lot of fun as well. And we both appreciate Eric a lot and his insights into the startup world. He's a successful founder himself and is now doing a lot of work in the space of creating the ecosystem or the opportunity for a lot of other founders to be successful in his home state in Iowa in the US. Eric, we hand over to you and are really excited to hear your talk.
Thank you both. This is an exciting opportunity to talk to all of you about the experiments and things we've been trying to do. To be honest, I've learned a lot, so much from the Scrum Alliance community at gatherings around the world. It's been an amazing journey. A little bit about me. I started my first company in 1999, 2 years out of college. It's a software company called Geonetric. And we started our Agile journey in 2008 and did some massive, I guess you would call it, transformation stuff in 2012, 2013, 2014. After that, I founded a nonprofit called Nubo Co. Its purpose was to work with startups, which is how this conversation came to be. We also do a lot of workforce development, technical talent in particular. And we started that organization with agility baked in. Everything I'd learned at my prior company, when we started the nonprofit new company, we could start with exactly the values we wanted. And agility was baked in from the get-go. In 2016, I joined the Scrum Alliance Board of Directors, which has been an incredibly rewarding experience. And this past year, I've transitioned my role into working with startups from a funding side of things. We have a micro venture fund in Iowa where I spend time making investment decisions. But all of the companies that we invest in as part of the deal, they learn agility. It's tied to the nonprofit Nubo Co. So it's an exciting and an interesting journey. But for most of you, at least it seems like most of you are not from the United States. And even people in the United States don't know where Iowa is. This is what Iowa looks like for real. And it's part of what the sort of joke is. It's a lot of corn. We are an agricultural state. We grow a lot of corn here. And in fact, we grow a lot of pigs here. There are more pigs in Iowa than people. Iowa's population is about 3 million people, and it is right in the middle of the country. There is a T-shirt that I will share with you. My friend owns this company, and we sort of joke about Iowa being in the middle of nowhere, and you can wave from the airplane as you fly from New York to San Francisco. We're a self-deprecating kind of folks here. But what's cool about Iowa is it actually has a heavy tech component too. You might have heard the saying, better than sliced bread, better than sliced bread. Sliced bread was invented in Iowa. The machine that cuts sliced bread was invented here. One of the very first digital computers was invented here. The first GPS signals were received here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The radios that talk to the astronauts on the moon and the Apollo missions and still today are built right here in Cedar Rapids. We have a lot of engineers here building interesting things. And so we kind of have this tilt toward technology companies, which is what I've gotten into and what is the basis for a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Most people come to Agile and Scrum through a technology view. At least that's been my experience. It was my own. We started with our technical teams learning Agile. And so we're going to start with kind of that background, and we're going to look at agility today in startups in particular, but through 3 different views. Sort of the most zoomed in view is how do you grow startups with Agile values from the beginning? Then we're going to talk a little bit about why those values help make them stronger. And I'm going to share some examples with you of companies here that we've worked with where agility has made a big difference in their growth rate and how they've thrived as businesses. But then we're going to zoom out a whole notch and talk about why agility in startups helps make a community more resilient. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about the biggest why which is a really cool concept and what really motivates me and why I'm passionate about everything we're going to talk about here today. So we'll start with that first one about building startups and really thinking about startup formation around Agile values. As I mentioned, I'd started my Agile journey in 2008, and we created the program called Iowa Startup Accelerator, which is similar to accelerators in communities all over the world. But we really wanted to bake Agile in from the get-go, to build Agile values in as part of the core of the program. And when I say Agile values, I'm meaning that in an abstract sense to refer to everything from the Agile Manifesto's values, valuing the things on the left over the things on the right, even though the right is important. I'm talking about the Scrum values of commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect, and also the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. So I'm referring to Agile values that way when I think about what we're trying to do. And startups are no better nor no worse necessarily at Agile values than anyone else. In fact, there have been good examples in the news of companies that absolutely lack Agile values, courage and openness and respect. And you might have seen some of these where Agile values are not what we're seeing in a lot of these companies. They're going down a dark path, so to speak. And it's really important for us to say, hey, if we're going to invest in companies to have them grow here, we want them to start with the right foundation, with the right values. And I'll give you a couple of components of how we do that in our accelerator program. These are early stage companies coming in. Just to be clear, they have almost every case, few or no customers when they come in, little or no revenue when they come in. The founders are often first-time founders and brand new. We start with Agile training in the very first week of the program. If for the companies that are admitted, we often bring in certified Scrum trainers or coaches to come in and give them a quick 2-day basic alignment around what is this, how does it work, how do I take these thoughts in, and then over the remainder of that program, which is about 14 weeks, we continue to build on that foundation. There's a ton of practicing those things. Some of you have probably seen this exercise if you've gone through a certified Scrum Master or Product Owner training. This is a pretty common example of processing ping pong balls and doing them in short iterations to learn as a team how to get faster and better with fewer errors and making the customer happy. It really teaches reflection and experimentation in a very rapid way as an example of that. So we both simulate those things to give the founders experience with iteration and learning as a team. Then, of course, we translate that into their real businesses as they get started. We bring in a lot of outside perspectives. It's really important that the founders are out and talking to mentors and people who've been there before. And we try to bring in mentors and experts who exhibit Agile values so that when they come in, they see the things they're learning in the classroom, so to speak, in the founders who've been there before. They can express why it helped make them successful as business owners. They go through 14 weekly sprints as part of it, and they certainly do sprint reviews with stakeholders every week, which is often pretty terrifying, right? As a founder, you're figuring it out for the first time, and you're supposed to be presenting to potential investors in the room. Sometimes there's customers in the room listening to you talk about what did or did not work that week, and it's a humbling experience, right? You have people there literally judging you and giving you feedback that are the people you want to sell to or want to invest in your business. And that's part of the purpose of it, right? We want that sort of relationship to be built in where it's regular for you to be, as a founder, speaking to your constituents on a regular basis about what worked and what didn't, and putting your progress or lack thereof out in the front. They also do retrospectives, which is a really key piece, and I arguably the most important piece of our program is building retrospectives in from the get-go. Many of the founders are first-time founders, and sometimes they know their co-founder and maybe their small team. It's usually 2 to 5 people on the team. And while they've probably worked together, being in a startup is not like having a job in the cubicle next to each other, right? This is a very different thing. The stress that they face and the tension that they're under, because it's literally a matter of survival for the business. Retrospectives give them a framework to talk about what's working as a team and to build that trust that's really fundamental to any high-performance team. We try to model that as a program as well. We do retrospectives with the entire cohort a few times along the way, attempting to model as our organization what it feels like to have an open and honest retrospective with people. And it's definitely intended to bring out those things that are not going well and the things that are causing problems. We see this as a really fundamental part of being a good founder, is the ability to take feedback, both from stakeholders and mentors, but also your team. You have this short-term advantage of a small team that's really focused. Retrospectives help you leverage that expertise and that honesty. We also bake in transparency from the get-go, that feedback from all parties on a regular basis, and just seeing that in the community at large is a humbling experience as well. And it's really important for us to make sure that the idea of transparency is built into these businesses as early as possible. And then finally, it culminates in what we call a launch day. It's a little bit different from a demo day at most accelerators. It's not necessarily intended to be investment necessarily from venture capitalists or angel investors, for example. It's more about, as a business, here's what we've learned and here's where we're going next. And it's on a show. It's a show, right? It's in front of hundreds, sometimes up to 1,000 people, of what you've learned and what, as a founder, that your team has built and how it solves a problem for customers in the real world. So we see all of these as part of taking the core Agile values and building them into programs in the way we teach and train these founders to grow as leaders, as businesses. But I want to step back for a minute, because I mean, that's interesting, but why? Why does this work? Why are startups the focus of this? And why does it make sense to do it that way? Some of you probably know of Steve Blank. He talks a lot about how startups are not just small, big businesses, right? It's not like you just scale down a big corporation to a small one and that's a startup. No, a startup is a temporary organization, right? It's trying to find its way. It doesn't know its path yet. It doesn't have the things that a big company has. You're looking for that scalable and repeatable business model. Greg this morning talked about the business model canvas. Is definitely a piece of what we use as thinking through how quickly you can find that business model. But these companies are searching, right? They are not ready to scale yet. They're not ready to grow. And so they have this moment in time early in their life cycle where a bunch of the factors that are their main advantages are perfect for why Agile values fit into this. The first obvious piece is agility is natural for startups, right? The teams are small, they're fast, they're lightweight, they're focused. If done well, they're focused on very simple and very clear early goals. The processes of big companies have not calcified into strict rules yet. Experimentation is built in. It's part of how they work. They have the ability to prioritize things because there's not a legacy of weight of this work that is has to be continued. You can stop and shift on a dime really quickly. And these are skills that can also be taught, right? It's both a natural and inherent advantage of a startup as opposed to an incumbent player, but it's also something you can teach and build in as a core advantage for startups. Another big advantage is that they have this opportunity that's unusual to establish values early. At the company that I founded before doing this, we kind of went through this soul searching about a decade in to rethink what the values of the company truly were. And we used Agile values as the foundation for that. But it was extremely hard to change the values of a company 10 years in, right? We'd hired people who without that frame of mind of what we really valued as a company. And so the thinking through, hey, if we shift the values of the company, does that mean we have people on our team that don't have those values? What does that mean? Do we have to change out a lot of employees to make this work? Have we talked to customers of what we've already sold them that maybe doesn't fit into that framework? Startups don't have this problem, right? Startups can create the values that they want early on. And in particular, the founder has an opportunity. Usually there's, one or maybe two people who are the founding team. They have this opportunity to decide what's really important to them. What values do they hold that they're willing to pay a price to have? And a lot of times that doesn't happen until much later in a company's growth. So what we try to do is teach them early on as a leader, you need to think through what it is that matters to you as a leader that you want to be the basis for the values of your company. And we encourage them to think about the Agile values as part of that. And almost all of them adopt Agile values and concepts they build from that early framework into how they articulate the values in their company. Those values then translate into culture. It gives you a framework to talk to employees about making decisions in the business. It gives you a way to think about what behaviors you want to reward as the company grows. Do the values and the culture of the business really reflect the Scrum values and Agile values as you think through how to onboard employees, as the last speaker spoke about, and how important those things are. So this ability to kind of flow from the core values of Agile into the values of the business into the culture that you want to build is key to how we like to train entrepreneurs, because they kind of get this one chance to do it early on, and we want to make sure they take advantage of it. I mentioned before that business model experimentation is easier at this stage, and this is really, really crucial and something they have to take advantage of. If a business wants to change, the core value proposition it offers to customers 5 years in, it's incredibly hard to do. And what we're trying to do with these early founders is take advantage of this time where these things are not locked in, and they can test different examples of ways to build a business model that lets them create something that's sustainable over time. This ability to do this leverages that business model canvas very, very, very deeply. And to be honest, we actually teach this same skill to existing businesses that are up in sometimes big corporations as well, talking about business model change. But the challenges those companies face are completely different than what startups face. So there's this advantage in the startup of being able to explore quickly, and we make sure they take advantage of that one-time chance. They also have this ability to work well because the team is small. If you've gone through Scrum training, they talk about how the ideal team size is about what you can feed. Two large pizzas will feed that team. Basically, every startup begins that way, and you have this moment in time where information is shared really quickly and teams can respond really quickly. But what's really cool about it is you set this idea early on, just as an example, that retrospectives are something the entire company participates in. And you can talk about the things together across every discipline, every department, which is half of one person's brain is a department at this size, right? Everybody together talks about it. Everybody can see customer feedback in a way that bigger companies never get, right? It's filtered through customer surveys and summarized down to 3 key points, but it loses the nuance. Early on, you have this advantage of the team being totally focused on the customer. Every ounce of a small team is focused on figuring out and understanding that customer's problem so that you can solve it. In a bigger company, it's very different, right? You have you're spending time managing people below you in the hierarchy, and you're spending time managing up to make sure the people above you recognize how awesome you are, and so you can get that corner office, right? In a small team, none of that pressure is there. None of that time waste in the system is there. It's all focused on making the customer happy. And there's this moment in time early on that we want them to take advantage of to build those practices and values early that they can then carry on later as the company grows. It's also really interesting because organizational design at this stage is easy. I spend a lot of time working with older companies as well, trying to figure out how do we design an organization that can respond to change in a natural and fluid way? What does business agility really look like? At this early stage, it's kind of baked in. You can't really get away from it. You're not really worried about organizational design and that org chart of who kind of works where. You have this sort of lack of hierarchy that's a massive advantage while you're exploring, and you can take advantage of that to learn really, really quickly. Most companies, as they grow, start to quickly separate into functional silo departments. And that's where I see a lot of companies start to stumble as they figure out, wait, this slows us down tremendously. We get, the marketing people all on the same team. They learn their discipline really quickly together, but you see this drift between the marketing and the sales and the product development and other teams. You start to see this movement apart. And in particular, the thread that delivers value to customers through the whole stream of departments is really hard to keep together. So startups have this moment in time where they can design the organization to rapidly respond to change, and they definitely take advantage of that. They also have this ability to create feedback loops to get feedback from customers. In fact, at this stage, ignoring feedback from customers is often a fatal mistake, and can destroy the business very quickly. In a big established company, maybe you can ignore feedback for a little while and decide what to do with it. And that slowness might not kill you because you kind of have this momentum as a business. But for startups, those feedback loops are built in, and it's what gives them that closeness to the customer that lets them respond more quickly to change. And I think you're seeing this a lot right now. There's been some recent studies by the Kauffman Foundation in the United States, and I would suspect this is probably true everywhere, that basically talks about how essentially all new job growth comes from small and early stage companies, right? The big companies typically are not on net growing. It's often these small companies, these younger companies that are creating overall all of the new job growth. And that's because those companies, in my opinion, are closer to customers and they can generally respond more quickly to marketplace change. I want to give you two quick examples of that. One is Rantizo. This is my friend Mike Ott. He went through our program in 2018. He started with this idea of a patent on a nozzle that sprayed a liquid onto crops, but electrostatically charged it. So it was very efficient. It would kind of glom onto the leaf, so to speak. He has rapidly grown this business. He's mounted that onto drones to deliver pesticides and herbicides to farm fields, which in Iowa, there are many farm fields and there are many drones and other engineering expertise here to take advantage of. He started this business just a few years ago, and as a small business, he was able to rapidly build this platform out. He is rapidly selling it all over the United States, and I believe maybe into Canada by now. And interestingly, he is the first company to receive FAA approval in the United States to fly in swarms to deliver application of pesticides and herbicides. His agility as a leader has helped him navigate a heavily regulatory, a market that has heavy regulatory interference, let's just say, as he builds this business out. But it was also dramatically affected by the pandemic, and he was able to really quickly pivot to using the drones to sanitize venues and stadiums as they tried to figure out how do we bring people back, even if they're very spread out into stadiums. He had this ability to respond to that change really quickly. This business is 3 years old, and he's doing really, really well as he grows and responds to those kinds of changes. Just as quick examples, he's been able to rapidly pivot to new customer segments and value props. In my mind, I can picture that business model canvas shifting at each stage as he grows and changes. He's built this culture of experimentation and learning into the business. He's got transparency baked into what he's doing. And he's just had this remarkable speed, even in a highly regulated industry. So it's been really, really fun to watch him grow that business. One other example is a company called SwineTech. This gentleman's name is Matt Rhoda. He founded this company in 2015 as a student at the University of Iowa. His idea was to save baby piglets in farrowing crates. It's a problem in the United States and probably elsewhere. I believe it's a global problem. It is. He had this idea for a hardware device that he could build that would detect lay-on events where the piglet was at risk of dying, and they have the ability to basically solve that problem using technology. It's a really incredible platform. And he's been able to really build some incredible strategic relationships. Those of you in the United States know who Johnsonville is. Maybe that's a global thing. In Iowa, it's a big thing. We eat a lot of bratwurst here. But they've been able to build these strategic relationships with companies in this field all over the world. And it's just an incredible business watching him grow. Similar to Rantizo, he's had to make some adjustments as the pandemic took hold and things have changed in relationship to pork sales around the world. And so they pivoted into a software product called PigFlow to add an additional revenue stream for their business as they grew, to respond to the change out there when maybe the sales for the hardware product got a little tougher during the downturn there this spring. They were able to really rapidly spin up some new products that actually build the value and ultimately the flywheel effect of their business as they grow. Again, just a couple of quick call outs here. Again, rapidly pivoting to new customer segments and value propositions, responding to the change quickly over what was originally a very well-established plan. They've got an amazing retrospective culture with feedback loops built in and collaboration. It's just incredible. And I have other examples I could share with you too. There's a wonderful company here in Cedar Rapids that's doing some great stuff in the real estate space called Stratafolio that's changing very quickly. It's just amazing to watch. In any case, the reason we do this is because founders that adopt these Agile values deeply are more likely to be successful, and they're having stronger growth trajectories. In fact, I don't know quite how to mathematically show this to you, but it's, if I would plot them on a chart, that upper right quadrant of Agile values and growth rate are absolutely at least correlated, and in my opinion, they're very causatively related. But I want to step back really briefly to sort of another view of why this matters to me. We're trying to build an ecosystem around Agile values. In other words, it's bigger than just these startups. We want to infect other people with these ideas of what Agile values really mean. In my little town in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, we've had the unfortunate distinction to have multiple natural disasters. This was us in 2008. That is basically the entire downtown of the city underwater. It was awful. Billions of dollars in damage. At the time, it was the fourth worst natural disaster in US history. It is now not the fourth. Like, we've had so many natural disasters in the United States since then that have overtaken it, but the damage was significant. We like to joke about it. Again, my friend with the t-shirts, we kind of mock a little bit, self-deprecating. It takes more than floods, tornadoes, pandemics, or a Midwestern hurricane, which was the most recent thing. Hurricane in the middle of the United States is not something we have. A couple of weeks ago, this happened, destroying millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars worth of corn, and homes and apartments were destroyed. And so part of our thinking here is, how do you create a community that is resilient to change, right? Climate change is real, and we're seeing the effects of it already right here. Here's the big hint. Agile values can play a really big role in this, right? We build these startups, we work with them. We're trying to figure out, how do we take those same values and share that as a community, as a region, to build companies and organizations, nonprofits, and even governments that are more resilient to change. One of the ways we do that, we share a lot of the learning. We have tours of the Agile companies in our region and interviews with those leaders who've done some really incredible Agile transformations, sharing what they're learning with each other so everybody can learn quickly. We have big companies learning agility right alongside startups. The gentleman speaking here is with Collins Aerospace, which is the single largest employer in our town. Does a lot of avionics equipment and government stuff. It's a really incredible engineering company doing just amazing work, and they're learning agility right alongside the startups in our community and learning from each other as they grow. We're teaching innovation and agility at the colleges in our area to make sure those students that are coming out know how to latch onto these things. And we even introduce it into computer science in schools and the different events that we operate with kids so they can get used to this idea. In this case, it's kids learning Scratch and code.org. But the idea of working in small iterations to try something and then learning from each other of what worked and what didn't as they figure it out is a core value that we bake into all of those. If you've been to a startup weekend, right, you can introduce an entire community to iteration and building in customer feedback, and those core values of including customers in the conversation early on is something you can just teach people in your town. We connect people to global expertise. Much like this event, I invited a whole bunch of my friends. I'm pretty sure of the 50 United States, Iowa is the best represented of the 50 in this event right now. But we also hold our own events where we bring in speakers. Some of the people from this I'm going to be reaching out to next time to come speak at our event, trying to build those relationships and bring that expertise. And then finally, we try to learn from those failures. This is one of my favorite examples. It's a founder of a company that a week before our program ended, Amazon introduced essentially the same thing and pretty much destroyed the business. He went out on stage anyway and talked about what he learned and how that failure helped make him a better leader in the future as he goes on. He's gone on to do some other incredible things as he's grown. So all of this brings me to what the big why is at the end of the day, the real reason all of this matters. As a global community, we face these huge problems. We face climate change, we face pandemics, economic upheaval, and things I'm sure we can't even imagine yet. 2020 is not even over yet. We're going to have all kinds of challenges to deal with. And what I've observed is the way we've built organizations and companies in the past simply isn't up to the task of solving those problems. We need a new way for people to collaborate, new ways for people to lead, to be able to solve these kinds of problems. And in my view, I see the Agile values as the foundation of building all of those things, through to startups, through to communities, through to entire countries and even nations thinking about how to solve these meaningful problems. Our survival as a species potentially could depend on high performance teams working together using Agile values. I'm excited to explore this territory and keep learning. And I'd love to learn together with you. I'd love to hit me up on Twitter at Eric Engelmann. Excited to learn more.
And it's time for some questions, Eric. I'm always surprised. I know you for a couple of years, but I'm always surprised how many things you can do and how much energy you have and all those other things. And I still remember that trip we did from Dublin to Cork, without even realizing we're gonna spend 3 hours in the bus on the way there and 3 hours on the way back, and we've been talking about all that stuff. So that's still on my top list of memories. Thank you for that. Now back to the questions. Niksha is asking, did you try to apply startup agility in Europe, and is it different than applying it in the US?
I honestly don't know. I know a few startup leaders who are similar to what we're doing in Europe, and I've seen them be successful with using it, but I don't know that I feel like I can definitively answer that question, to be totally honest.
Oh, that's fair. So I got in the next one. Helen is asking if you have a poster child, if you are familiar with that term, for an Agile startup that fits all or most of your descriptions.
Well, I'd like to say that all the ones we've invested in have those values, but I would say the two that I've shared there are probably the best examples of those. I've observed, just as an example, the swine tech one, the Saving Our Bacon company. They essentially, I've watched them do retrospectives. I've facilitated some retrospectives with them, and the honesty and candor in a company like that is so refreshing to watch, because the founder isn't afraid of an employee calling out a problem in front of everyone else. A lot of leaders are intimidated by that. They refuse to. I have an example of another company. It was not one we invested in, but we had this essentially a tiny retrospective where an employee called out a problem, and the founder was so embarrassed and ashamed that they shut the meeting down and decided not to continue. And I was like, I think you're not ready to work with us. That's not how it is. You either are willing and ready to face it or not. And so that contrast is really, really clear to me. But Swine Tech, I would say, clearly exhibits those behaviors, and they've taken it to heart in everything in the way they work. It's been fun to watch.
So how do you search those leaders and the startups which are ready to work with you?
How do we select them? Yeah, that's a great question. So we did this interview process early on when we're thinking of investing in a company and taking it into our program. And we're looking for fundamental skills of the ability to respond to feedback. And often that's from us. So we often test the founders by questioning the assumptions in their early concept. And the ones who get really offended by that questioning, or they get really defensive and they don't hear that there might be other ways, it's not an option for us to invest time or money into their business. We also look at fundamental leadership skills of those founders and their communication skills. So we often start, we're investing in a person and a leader, but their ability to build a team out of that is ultimately what the investment is about. So even if they're great as an individual, if they don't have the raw material to be a good leader, to speak with honesty and transparency, to have empathy and fundamentally kindness as part of their ability to lead, we won't invest there either. So we have a bunch of techniques and questions that we ask along the way, intended to try to illuminate that. It's not perfect by any means, but it works well, I think, at trying to filter down to people that we think will accept this way of working.
I was thinking about that because when you have these values and cultures, right? Those are those fluffy, touchy-feely sort of subjects, and a lot of executives, even in a bigger organization, they would say, yeah, those are not important. We need a framework, or we need a business canvas or a tool, right? And then I feel like, yeah, maybe the culture is more important. So that's interesting that you select people who are ready for this. And I have one more question for Anita. Do you believe it is possible to start building agile mindset in a big, old, worldwide corporation with long history successfully? And if yes, what's the trigger?
Absolutely. So we have a team that essentially does exactly that. And honestly, at least I'm sure there are many ways to do this, but one of the ways that we help big companies to see the potential of this mindset and the impact that it can have. When you interview executives and leaders in those companies, often what keeps them awake at night is fear of disruption from an upstart. It happens all the time. And the overall culture of the business and the ability of that culture to move quickly enough to respond to change. And they don't always say it those ways, but that is fundamentally what they will articulate. And so a lot of what we're doing is mapping those things to how Agile helps you respond to that, right? An organization that is Agile has a culture that can respond to change and a business that can respond to change, both. And those are very related issues. And so often what we're doing is taking the problems in the words that the leaders of those companies and sometimes just rank and file employees articulate and mapping those to how agility solves those problems. And it's actually remarkably easy, especially when you have the examples of companies that don't have those problems, or those problems are much less severe. Mm-hmm. And you can directly talk about how the Agile values prevent those things from taking root. So really it's about mapping those, almost like pulling out what they're afraid of, their fears, and talking about how this starts to address those concerns. And I think you can do that from the top level at the executive and the C-suite, but you can also do it from small teams that start to see success, and people start to say, I want to be on that team. And the managers of the slower, less agile department start to realize that their employees they want to do that, work that way. And they start to think, okay, maybe there's something special that I need to figure out there. So certainly those small examples inside big companies start to build momentum. But it is harder. It absolutely is harder. It's not a natural thing, I think, for a big company, many big companies, to really take those values to heart and actually meaningfully incorporate them into their culture. In fact, they've often been rewarded for the opposite, right? You've probably built a culture where employees at all levels are rewarded for kingdom building, of having control of a set of resources, for heroic behaviors that are the opposite of what you'd want a high performance team to do as a group. And so it often starts to become so overwhelming that it's challenging to do. And yet you point to companies out there, perhaps you'd say SpaceX as an example of that, of companies that are comparatively very large, solving very, very complex problems, but clearly exhibiting some or all of the Agile values in the way that they work, in the way that they lead. Those examples help to make the case that you can, as a company, really, really take on big challenges and change over time.
Siva is asking, maybe I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. How do you approach the product development?
Well, I mean, the good news is at the early stage, there's not a lot in place that prevents you from doing pretty much anything. So a lot of what we're doing early on is trying to figure out what is the components that the product needs to have that solve end-to-end the problem that the customer has in the thinnest possible slice. So, and then specifically to startups, what we're trying to do is to figure out how to cut through the complexity of the entire problem down to the thinnest possible slice that solves it. And this is often really, really hard because a lot of, in my view, often the founder effectively acts as the product owner, formally or informally. And the founder often is the problem, right? The founder has a picture in their mind of what it should be. and the ability to trust a team to go solve those problems, or to let the customer feedback actually infect what was in their brain to change what's in their mind, is often a big challenge. And so, we have to break through that founder's mindset to be able to let the feedback from the customer, the data, drive new product development decisions and prioritization decisions. And that's often very, very hard to do because the founder has that vision, and it's probably been years they've thought about it. They know in their mind, they know what it should be, but they're wrong. They just don't know they're wrong. And so one of the ways we try to address that is to make sure that when they do the customer development process, the founder has to interview the customer to understand the problem. They can't send off they can't do it in a survey. They can't send it off to an intern. I want that founder to hear the customer say, that's not how the problem works for me at all. It's like this, or, well, that's interesting, but that doesn't actually solve the problem for me. Like the founder needs to hear that dagger to the heart of oh, I was wrong, because they don't believe it when anyone else says it. So I don't know if that answers the question. Product development is a huge, huge question, but that's one of the ways we try to help founders prioritize decisions early on, and to get that feedback baked in early, that feedback is valuable and needs to be heard with their own ears in real time wherever possible.
And there is something about the ego of those founders as well, right? It must be really hard for them to hear that message face to face.
Yeah,
I think it's a good type of start, right? Because if they are open to hear it at the beginning, they most likely are keep opening. It's getting easier, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, it's kind of a balancing act between a founder needs ego to be able to withstand the pain of founding a business. It hurts. It's painful. You're going to get hurt emotionally starting a business. So ego is really important. And yet at the same time, you're right. An ego can also be the death knell of the business if you're not careful. They have to be willing to hear that feedback and incorporate it into their strategy.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. But, I'm following you on Facebook, and with every disaster or change, I see you start doing a new initiative. So with that hurricane, I've seen all those pictures you've been posting. And of course, we talk about it. Sometimes those pictures gives you more, right? And with COVID, I also see how you turned, I don't know if it was your office or some other building, into a factory for the masks. So can you speak a little bit about those initiatives? Because I think they are part of that ecosystem and part of that higher mission, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So the nonprofit NuboCo, right, its mission is focused around building startups and other things. But when the pandemic hit, we had this building that we work in that was pretty much empty. Everybody worked from home. And there was this in Iowa and a lot of places in the United States and around the world, there was this movement to basically build face shields, particularly with 3D printers and laser cutters and other things, until production could ramp up to meet the need from big players. And there was part of this movement. And so in Iowa, in our community, we in a few weeks built this whole infrastructure to build. I think we built and shipped 25,000 face shields, all volunteer based, all from donors who contributed money to buy the supplies. And so I see that as a good example of an organization, in this case a nonprofit, responding to a community need that it faced. That was not planned nor expected, nor even something you ever could have written down that you would have needed, but we just happened to be in the right place at the right time and ideal. And what's really interesting about it is, through that experience, it connected a whole group that was not maybe part of our orbit before that. It was not part of our community, our smaller localized community. And it really, I think, infected people with this idea that we can solve problems really quickly, and they saw Agile values in action through that. So it was a exciting experiment to see if it really worked, and it did.
And you've been doing it for the hurricane, right? You've been helping those people without the homes as well. So that was another similar activity, right?
Yeah. I think the through the nonprofit entity and all the people that it pulls in, there's this tendency to attract people who think, hey, I can do things that solve problems. And so it's not certainly just people in that group by any means, but it certainly has this ability to respond quickly and inspire people to respond quickly. And if nothing else, I hope that it inspires people to understand they can be part of a solution to a problem, a big problem or a small one.
Mhm. What was the most difficult situation you've been dealing with in this, nonprofit life or startup, helping startup life? Or
there are several that come to mind. One of them is what happens when there's a founder that comes in that maybe has the right values but realizes the business is not going to work. Like that, those conversations are really emotional for everyone. And it might have been, there might have not been any way to prevent that from happening. So one of the things I think that's important is almost to normalize outright failure. That example that I shared is just one, but there are a few, and some that were much further. That one was fortunate in that they had just started that business. It was maybe a few months old. But you throw your life and maybe your life savings into a company and it ultimately doesn't work. Like that really hurts, right? You want to be positive, you want to be supportive, but part of the job is to say, it's not working. Let's put you on something that's more valuable to the world and to your mental health. Like this is draining and exhausting for you. And sometimes that's the job. So of the things I have to do, that's probably the least fun, but it's also probably one of the most important.
Mm-hmm. So what gives you the energy on the other side?
Coffee. Coffee. No, I think it's one of the things that makes, I think a lot of the Agile world, I think you see a lot of energy in people who are attracted to Agile values because they can see the end result, right? Agile is set up, if done well, that your work on a daily basis, when you move that card from left to right on your physical board or your virtual board, like you should be able to map that to, I made a customer's life better. I solved a problem for someone, whatever that was. And like that self-reinforcing motivation, if done well, is I think what gets everybody excited. And so for us, right, we've built an organization whose purpose is to help a region and maybe an entire state be more resilient to economic upheaval and climate change and whatever through building leaders and companies and organizations that have these values. And like, I can see that happening. Like you can see companies that are getting stronger and responding to changes in ways that they probably wouldn't have otherwise. So the work we do on a daily basis is intrinsically motivating by the way it's set up. And I think that's true of pretty much any company that solves a meaningful problem in the world and uses Agile values to build those feedback loops in.
But it's so fascinating to hear you saying that, right? We all know that somehow.
Yeah.
Just because you speak about it, you just make us think about, maybe there is something on it. We should remember on that.
There's something very special in that. And, going to, the Scrum Alliance global gatherings, you get to hear other people talk about how they've experienced it and see how different it is from your own and realize that the rabbit hole of opportunity in the Agile world goes so much deeper than any individual has ever explored. And that, I guess that's part of what also is exciting about it in a very abstract sense. There's this global community of people sharing what they're learning together, and we're all figuring it out. Human society has never solved these kinds of problems before because maybe it never had to, maybe never had the tools to do it. But I'm convinced that inside this box, there is something very special here. If we can figure it out together, we can tackle just about anything.
So how do you envision in your dreams the world in 10 years from now?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would like to see Agile values taught in schools on a regular basis. In some cases, they are. I'm married to a teacher, and she actively teaches it to her kids. Right, they're solving problems in the things that they're doing and building in feedback and working together as teams with a lot of transparency and retrospectives, for example. So I think that would be a huge for the future of humanity. I'd like to see companies, both for-profit and nonprofit, being much more open about their successes and failures and how they're learning. So the ability to share what's working as they grow and as they learn. I feel like there's been a lot more of that. You've probably seen, Buffer, for example, being very public about things that are usually very secret and the ways it's working and sometimes not working for them. Menlo Innovations is another good example. Maybe Zappos fits some of that too. These companies that are sharing what they're learning and making that normal so we all get better over time. I think you see that in social media done well. If you're on Twitter, just as an example, the amount of knowledge that's shared there when you filter to the right people. There's a lot of trash on Twitter too, but you filter to the right people, the amount of knowledge sharing and willingness to publicly put information out that before was secret. I feel like we've made huge strides in the last 30 years. 30 years from now, like the amount of knowledge and information available to us, how to filter down to what helps you as a leader or as a business or an organization be better. Like when that sharing happens regularly, it's going to change everything for the better.
What is the one thing you want people to remember from today?
I think the thread of agility from a seed you plant in the smallest company and the effect that can have if you're intentional about sharing that it can have an effect on a region or a country, a world. That's really an idea that I don't think gets explored enough. I think it's, how do I do Scrum on my software team? And then how do I scale it up across several teams and maybe into a business? But to me, agility is something that, done well can infect millions, billions of people if done well with the right mindset and values.
Thank you very much. It's been really enlightening to talk to you again. I learned a lot about what you're doing, even if I thought we chat about it already, right? It's always great to talk to you. And we're going to have 10 minutes break, 9 minutes break, and then we continue. Stay tuned.